Good evening, I'm Peter Hobday, going places. Tonight, will the high-speed Channel rail link ever get the green light? And we sample British Rail's new sandwiches and live. Seacat, Hoverspeed's new high-speed catamaran, is now berthed in Somerset, Massachusetts, USA, after her dry dock repairs in Panama. Hoverspeed still hopes to make an attempt on the Blue Ribbon for the fastest crossing of the Atlantic by passenger vessel, but it's a catch-22 situation, because if the Seacat was damaged again, it would only further delay the start of the new cross-channel services planned for some 3 weeks' time. Hoverspeed's managing director, Robin Wilkins, has gone across to America to see for himself the state of the vessel before making a decision about the Blue Ribbon. And earlier, I asked him to tell me what he found when he went to the shipyard last night.
Well, I had a brief look at the craft. It looks absolutely magnificent. The interior is fully kitted out now, and it looks very bright and spacious. We now have to check the craft from a technical point of view.
What exactly was the problem that put her into dry dock, and is that now solved?
Well, we did always intend to dry dock it because obviously the craft has come some considerable distance. The main problem has been with impeller blades, which have been suffering some cracking, and obviously we wanted to find out what has been the reason behind that. We think we found the answer. We did amend it in Curacao, and we're now going to check whether or not it has stood up to the journey.
But the dry dock in Panama seems to have solved the problems.
Certainly, the craft came up here at full speed. It did just under 1,000 miles in 24 hours, which is very good going. It was touching 40 knots most of the way. So there's no doubt that the craft is very fast. What we need to do now is to find out whether it stood up to that and whether, therefore, we can move forward and bring the craft straight over to the UK.
Now, when you say move forward and bring the craft straight over to the UK, do you mean you're going to try for this blue ribbon attempt before you put her into service, or what?
Well, if the craft can make the blue ribbon attempt, then we would certainly like to make it, but we would not do so if that meant delaying passenger service. It is obviously the quickest way between 2 points, and so if we can make it straight away, fine. If it means a delay, then we will have to pass up the opportunity.
But isn't there a danger if you did that blue ribbon attempt that, it's a pretty punishing ride, there may be even further delays getting her into service?
No, I don't believe so. We wouldn't take any risks with the Blue Ribbon. The craft has stood up very well to its 10,000-mile journey so far, and so I've no fears on that score.
When can we expect the first passengers to go on board?
Well, we're still expecting to put the craft into service on the 28th of June, and unless something major was found that would compromise either its reliability or its safety, then certainly we are hoping for that date. We expect to leave to take the ship down to New York in a couple of days or so, probably Monday or Tuesday, and we'll make the decision then whether we're coming straight across or whether we need to do further work. We had planned to do some dry dock work in the UK in any case. We've now taken the opportunity to do that here, so the time slippage is not serious.
But isn't it a bit of a kind of catch-22 situation in a sense? If you don't do the blue ribbon, people will say, they didn't think they could do it anyway. And if you do it and damage it, they'll say, you see, they should never have done it, should they, really?
Well, I think when people see this craft, they will realise that it can do the blue ribbon. It is extremely fast. It's attracted tremendous interest here. And remember, we have several other of these craft coming along behind. So if we don't make it with this craft, then we can certainly make it with a subsequent one.
Final thought for you, Robin. Looking back, do you regret at all that you decided to bring around this way over such a long distance?
No, not at all. I think it was a very good route to bring the craft. It's given us ample opportunity to trial it and to find out all the wrinkles in it, and therefore to put them right before it goes into passenger service. There's no quick way to get from Tasmania.
That was Robin Wilkins, Managing Director of Hoverspeed, on the line there from Somerset, Massachusetts. And we hope to be going places when the Seacat goes places when it comes into service. Next week, the government expects to announce its decision on whether it will help fund a new high-speed rail link between London and the Channel Tunnel. The decision seems to be taking an unconscionable time a-coming, but it's urgently needed because the way things are at the present, by the late 1990s, the existing railway system in southeast England just won't be able to cope with the traffic generated by the Channel Tunnel. And if the government says no to any financial help, then the rail link scheme could collapse, says our transport correspondent Jonathan Marcus.
The line's being promoted by a consortium including British Rail and Trafalgar House under the banner of the European Rail Link. But it's not just money they want from the government. John Fletcher, European Rail Link's chairman, says that government support for the necessary legislation, what's known as a hybrid bill, is also vital, and he discounts suggestions that he's after a subsidy.
To get the planning permission effectively to build a new railway line, that requires a hybrid bill, will take probably a couple of years in Parliament. And no work of any sort, physical work, can start until the bill receives royal assent. The second part, in terms of Network South East, we have said that we believe in order to ensure that the commuters in Kent and the southeast of England get a real improvement to their commuting, it's going to be necessary for their trains to run on our railway line. And we're looking to be compensated for those trains running on our track. So this suggestion of subsidy is quite misleading. It's no more than a tolling fee, effectively, for running Network South East trains on a new railway line.
European Rail Link know that to overcome the widespread opposition in Kent to their new line, they'll have to offer something in return, and that something is a greatly improved commuter service. But there are many people who believe that the proposed line is being viewed in too narrow a context, and that in these ever more environmentally conscious times, the rail link, combined with the Channel Tunnel, could offer a significant opportunity to move more freight off the roads and onto rail. Alistair Morton is the British chairman of Eurotunnel, and he's got some strong criticisms of the government's estimates of how much freight his tunnel could carry.
Mr. Parkinson's civil servants are causing him to talk through his hat, regrettably. The important thing to look at is the purpose and destination of the freight and the type of the freight. The fact that we are never going to carry a proportion of the bananas coming from Costa Rica to the west coast of Britain is a foregone conclusion unless they get so fed up with the ports on the west coast of Britain they go via Rotterdam and the tunnel. What you need to look at is the fact that the commercial traffic, the export-import traffic between Britain and mainland Europe is the fastest growing segment of Britain's import-export business. And a rising proportion of that, now well above half, goes by the short sea route, where we will compete with the ferries. So we're talking about the proportion, the growing proportion of the largest segment of the increase in Britain's future.
Mr. Morton believes that the tangled saga of the rail link highlights serious difficulties in the way the government seeks to combine private and public money for major transport projects.
There is a problem. The problem exists in the mind of the Treasury and the extraordinary domination it has over government financial engineering and financial thought. A Treasury that is incapable of distinguishing between current expenditure and capital expenditure is already in trouble. A Treasury that is unwilling to listen to partnership investment plans between public purse and private sector is in today's world in deep trouble. Post-privatization, you have to be more flexible, more imaginative, more constructive in your financial engineering than before. The needs are big, they can be met by the marketplace in a suitable partnership with the public purse on a limited scale.
Speaking at a transport conference in London earlier this week, John Fletcher echoed this feeling of unease about the relationship between public and private investment. So I asked him if the government doesn't come up with the funding for the rail link and won't lend its support to the necessary bill, would he continue to throw good money after bad, or would this simply be the end of the line?
Clearly, if government decide that they can't promote a hybrid bill, which means there won't effectively be planning approval for a fast railway line, there isn't going to be a fast railway line.
And that report was by Jonathan Marcus. The time just coming up to 20.5 minutes to 7. Let's get the latest travel news tonight from Simon Parks in the BBC Travel Centre. Simon?
Well, I'm afraid the heavy showers have contributed to a number of accidents on several major routes this evening. Firstly, on the M1 in Buckinghamshire and Northamptonshire, it's very congested between junctions 12 and 16, and it's much the same on the Luton section near junction 9. To the west of London, the M25 clockwise carriageway is stationary in places over the Staines to Rickmansworth section, and in the northwest there's severe congestion on the M62 eastbound between junctions 15 and 17, just to the north of Manchester. Also in Cheshire, the M6 has north and southbound tailbacks, on the Thelwall Viaduct approaches near junction 20. In North Wales, roadworks on the A5 near Holyhead have caused a number of irate motorists to miss their sailings to Ireland over the past few days, so please allow extra time for your journey. And finally, don't forget that Sea-Link still has its problems on the Dover to Calais route.
Simon Parks at the BBC's Travel Centre. Now, getting your car into service is the bane of most people's lives. It always seems to be the wrong day. You always seem to need to be somewhere else. And so, really, the only answer is, rather than go to the garage, why not let the garage come to you? In fact, it's now possible, thanks to a new service being launched by a company called Automech. It's taking its service, which has been for the company fleet market, into the private sector as well. Tom Boswell's been talking to Tony Lefebvre, Automech's managing director, about the scheme.
What we've done, and we've done very successfully for the last 4 to 5 years, is to build garages, put those garages on wheels, and then take those garages to the customers wherever he wants the car serviced.
Ian, your engineer here, has a very well-equipped garage, and he's well into this car here now, getting it serviced. What I have to ask straight away, mostly you deal with new cars?
Yes, we do. We deal mainly with company cars and cars which drive 20,000 or more miles a year. That means that they need to be serviced between 2 and 3 times a year. Therefore, we gear and market our whole company to newish cars.
All the manufacturers are offering better and longer guarantees now, but they're beginning to specify that the service of your car has to be done at one of their dealers. Does this cause you problems?
Well, we think it's a total nonsense. If you look at the cost of warranty for manufacturers, it's fallen dramatically over the last 10 years. The majority of car maintenance which we do is to change the oil, check the car, check for safety, change the filters, and it doesn't, in our opinion, infringe any warranty rights which a customer may have.
There must be times, cars are getting more and more complicated. They've got onboard engine management computers, they've got anti-lock brake systems, they've got anti-skid controls, very sophisticated electronics. There must be times when your engineer gets out of his depth or needs more equipment. What do you do then?
Well, I suppose there would be odd occasions like that. They're very rare. What we have found is that modern car maintenance is about diagnosis and replacement. It's not about repairing. We have 120 engineers all over the country, backed up by technical support staff in 4 offices. We have very, very few problems which we can't handle on a day-to-day basis. All our vans have a computer on board, so they can check the computer, if you like, on the car.
Well, you've mentioned the engineers. Let's go and talk to Ian here, who's actually busy working on one of the brake discs at the back of the car. Ian, any problems on this car so far?
Only the rear pads seem to be a little low, which is causing the handbrake to have excessive travel. But apart from that, it's pretty good.
Well, I'm sure the owner will be pleased to hear that. Does that mean you're going to have to now go away for parts, or brake pads is something you carry because you knew you were going to service this car?
Generally, we keep pads and service items in stock, yes.
So have you got this one?
No.
Show me round your van, because I want to have a look in this. This is the bit that fascinates me. What sort of equipment, we've heard a little bit about it, but what do you actually carry on board? Let's go and have a look inside. It's like an Aladdin's cave.
Well, we've got a compressor, as you can see, for tyre pressures, and the air gun, power tool.
That's quite a big unit you've got there.
Yes, it is, yes. It's electric start and everything. We've got the tool for doing the CO, the mixture coming out the back.
Carbon monoxide
test. Yes. All the equipment for doing the timing.
Drawers and drawers of spanners and bits and pieces you've got.
Yes.
What's it worth, would you say, the contents of the van?
I think the complete unit's about £25,000 altogether.
Cars have changed a lot this last few years, haven't you? Let's look under the bonnet of this one, for instance, you've been working on. It's a modern Japanese car, inevitably.
Yes.
I see all the nuts and bolts in this, even have the size of the spanner you're going to need embossed on the top. Do you find any particular problems or bits that you would want changing in the design of cars?
On the Japanese side of it, I don't think so, because, well, not mechanically anyway. The bodywork could do with being a few millimetres thicker, I think. And I think you could probably drive a Japanese car to the breakers rather than have it fall to bits on you.
Tony Lefebvre of Automech talking to Tom Boswell there. In Hong Kong a few hours ago, some of the biggest Far Eastern carriers announced that they had decided to apply to join IATA, the International Air Transport Association. The airlines, Cathay Pacific, Singapore Airlines, Malaysian and Royal Brunei. And industry insiders reckon that Thai Airlines is hovering on the brink. Now, the move plugs a huge gap in IATA's world coverage, giving truly global reach now. I asked Chris Lockwood, our aviation correspondent, who's in Hong Kong, why had the airlines made this move?
I think they realise that there are so many problems facing the world's industry collectively that they have to be part of the main force. Congestion springs to mind immediately. Also, the way of dealing with travel agents collectively is another part of the reasons why they've decided to join now. But I think that the main thing is that without these carriers, these are big thrusting Asian carriers, the new giants rising in the east, and without them, the World Airline Parliament doesn't make any sense.
So what's in it for IATA then is more global coverage?
It is. It's been a large gap. I mean, if you put together all the Asian carriers, including those who are already members of the organisation, they will account for about 25% of the world's air traffic by the year 2000, and probably a lot more, because the air traffic demand is growing at a far greater rate from the Far East and Pacific region than it is in Europe or America or anywhere else for that matter.
Now, critics of IATA see it as just a price-fixing cartel and not much more, so if there's any truth in that criticism, why should thrusting Asian airlines, who base their appeal on being very competitive, want to join it?
Well, that is definitely the public impression of IATA. IATA is a great scapegoat. At the bottom line, it is the airlines themselves who have developed that protective price-fixing image, and ultimately the governments behind those airlines. Now, that is all changing. Now, one key thing here is that it's Cathay Pacific, it's Malaysian Airlines, Singapore Airlines, Royal Brunei, and we think that Thai International will be very close behind them. All these carriers have avoided the price-fixing element because they wanted to deal in their own markets in their own way, which means not obeying IATA-imposed restrictive rules, not just on prices, but also on dealing with travel agents and discounting. They saw nothing wrong with discounting, and why should they? IATA thought it was a way of undercutting the established airlines who ran the organisation. But you're quite right, that was one of the reasons that kept them out. But now that has changed. The system in the States has changed and broken the price-fixing cartel, if you like to call it that. Europe is moving towards liberalisation, and IATA's so-called restrictive practices have changed. But one key point is they are not joining not going to have anything to do with the price-fixing side of IATA. They will be members of the trade association dealing with issues that affect all the airlines of the world and not the price-fixing side. They're keeping well away from that. And IATA, more credit to them for accepting changing times, did shift a few years ago to have a two-membership option. One was just to be a member of the trade side, and the other was to be a full member, negotiating fares with the rest of them.
That was Chris Lockwood on the phone there from Hong Kong. The Bus and Coach Council have been meeting the Transport Secretary, Cecil Parkinson, this afternoon. We understand the meeting, in fact, has just broken up. Well, on the agenda is safety in the light of last Sunday's tragic crash in France, in which 11 people died. They've been talking about possibly seatbelts for coaches and more engine limiters to keep coaches within the required speeds for safety. We hope to be talking to somebody from the Council in just a few moments' time to tell us exactly what went on. But I've also been talking to David Rendell of National Express, who, as managing director of their Eurolines network, sends some 300,000 passengers a year to over 190 destinations around Europe, from as far as Scandinavia and Poland and Spain. Now, first, Mr. Rendell drew a distinction between scheduled and non-scheduled services.
In the case of scheduled services, we're running routes year-round, routes which have been run for many years and which have been carefully scheduled with a sufficient amount of time built into the timetable to allow for the normal sort of delays which we can now expect. Now, in the event of serious delay, the drivers are under strict instruction, first of all, not to speed, and are advised and reminded that in terms of ferry crossings, as the scheduled operators, we have access to any sailing as and when the vehicle arrives at Calais. Although I would agree with you that psychologically, any person who wants to please the customer, please his bosses, is going to feel a certain pressure in that direction.
Can you take us through, say, a new route? I mean, how do you work out the scheduling? What are the criteria that you use?
Well, obviously the start point has to be the legislation, the number of hours permitted at the wheel. And so when we look at a new route, we work out meticulously the time, the ideal time. We look at the time it's going to take in the event of delays, and from that we compare that to the actual driver's hours regulations, and we establish how many drivers will be required to cover that work in most circumstances.
Once you've done that work, does it then go on until other evidence emerges that you may need to change it in terms of times or the rest of it, or is there some kind of reassessment which normally takes place once every 3 months or 6 months, depending upon what is happening to that route?
Well, it has historically been the case that on some routes we have previously been able to operate to a certain point with 2 drivers, but subsequently we've decided that the delays that have occurred, I'm thinking in, for example, the case of a route to Italy where we were subject to regular delays in tunnels under the Alps, and it was decided that from the point of view of the UK operation, the best way to provide sufficient leeway on that route was to, in fact, run the vehicle from London to Lyon and there effect a change onto an Italian vehicle. So giving ourselves several hours spare capacity, if you like. And that is an example of one where we've specifically changed as a result of road conditions.
How do you keep in touch with the vehicles in the network? One thinks in a sense of air traffic control, where planes flying through various countries' airspace clock into beacons and say, we're now here, our ETA there is this, that and the other. And the airline knows exactly where its planes are at any given time. Have you got the same kind of contact with the individual driver? Say he's halfway down that motorway to Lyon. Can he check in with you from his coach and say, right, I have just passed whatever?
That's the ideal solution, obviously, and increasingly, certainly in the UK, coach operators are beginning to use radio telephones. As far as a pan-European network of that type of communication is concerned, the technology exists already, but it is incredibly expensive, and at the moment it's fair to say that what we rely on are regular reports from the staging posts, if I can call them that, along the line of route.
Well, that was David Rendell of National Express, and as I said, the meeting between the Bus and Coach Council and the Department of Transport, indeed the Transport Secretary, Mr. Parkinson, has just finished. And while you were listening to Mr. Rendell, Barry Hoy of the Bus and Coach Council came on a rather crackly line, I have to say, to tell us what had been agreed.
Well, we have agreed to recommend to our council at its meeting next week that we should encourage all operators to install seatbelts or have seatbelts installed on all new coaches. And we've also agreed a work programme where we would study with the department the problems associated with fitting seatbelts to existing vehicles.
So, seatbelts for coaches, that's the news tonight. That was Barry Hoy of the Bus and Coach Council. Let's now go to our business news slot. Here's David Press. David?
We usually concentrate, Peter, on travel difficulties within Europe in this slot, but spare a thought for India at the moment, where, following the crash of the Indian Airways Airbus A320 in February, 14 Airbuses were grounded. Now, clearly that's having a big effect on the number of passengers carried and, indeed, the number of flights operated. Here we are in June and the difficulties go on. The planes remain in their hangars because of a combination of doubts about ground facilities and adequate pilot training. And a new political controversy has now emerged surrounding the original approval given by Rajiv Gandhi for the purchase of those planes. Clearly bad news if you're trying to move around in what is, let's face it, a fairly large country. Mark Tully, the BBC's Delhi correspondent, has been monitoring the situation for going places.
Well, air travel in India is never the most comfortable of experiences because all the flights are full. It's very difficult to get reservations and people are quite often offloaded and flights are quite often late because the aeroplanes operate a very tight schedule. And I think all I can say is that it's a lot worse than that at present.
What is the effect on business people, business travellers, for example, who may want to go from one end of the country to the other? What's the alternative for them?
Anyone who finds himself offloaded off a plane or the schedule changed has great difficulties because the only alternative is the railway, which is very comfortable. I much prefer it myself, but reservations on that are very difficult. And over long journeys, of course, it's much slower.
What is needed for these Airbuses to get back in the air, if indeed they ever are going to get back in the air?
Well, first of all, what is needed is for the various inquiries to be completed, and then for someone to have their courage to put their signature on the bit of paper and say that the Airbuses can fly again. But many people in India don't believe that they will ever fly again, and there's been reports that Indian Airlines are A, thinking of leasing other aeroplanes, and B, trying to lease out their own Airbuses.
If either of those courses of action take place, Mark, how long is it likely to be before we see a resumption of normal service?
Well, quite a long time, I'm afraid. I wouldn't like to give any accurate figure, but I fear that unless action is taken quickly, Indian Airlines may still be in the mess they are when the major tourist season starts again in about October.
And we hear that Indian Airlines are trying desperately to lease or even sell those Airbuses, but in the meantime the situation doesn't look as if it's set to improve, and hazards ahead if you're travelling in India.
David Press there with the business travel news. Finally, some food for thought. Well, British Rail food to be more precise. Well, actually, British Rail sandwiches. No, don't laugh. British Rail have decided to launch some very upmarket sandwiches, in fact, designed by Sir Clement Freud. They came into service today, and I say don't laugh because British Rail are the nation's second largest sandwich seller, 8 million rounds a week. So when Mike McKechnie came into the studio this afternoon carrying some samples, I asked him what was BR's biggest selling line.
The top-selling sandwiches, in fact, are cheese ploughmans, which is basically malt bread filled with cheddar cheese, pickle and lettuce, and that sells 1.2 million a year.
Now, you're launching these new sandwiches today, designed by Clement Freud. You brought a couple into the studio, poached salmon with Chinese leaf and a dill and mustard sauce on oatmeal bread, and corned beef with tomato lettuce, tomato chutney on soft grain bread. And actually the labels look a bit like labels of a wine bottle.
Yes, that's deliberate, actually. About 10 months ago, we decided that we were going to take the product away from where it's traditionally been, which are very jazzy, bright-coloured labels. And we were going to take it slightly up market. And the sensible way to do that was to actually make it look like a wine bottle, with pictures of the quality ingredients on the front, and I think high-standard photography, and indeed the typeface as well. And I think that just suggests to the consumer that what they're actually buying is, in fact, a top-quality product.
But, I mean, the Clement Freud bit, isn't that going slightly over the top?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's got to be taken in context. What we were actually aiming to achieve was to put the subject of our product quality back on the agenda. And as such, we needed something which would achieve that. And Clement Freud, or Sir Clement Freud, actually designing sandwiches for us has not only put these two sandwiches back on the or in the minds of the public, but also our whole range. And so perhaps they're going to come back, approach it again and say, well, yes, maybe British Rail and Intercity have got the quality right now.
So presumably, because this is designed by Sir Clement Freud, this is very much an upper crust sandwich.
Yes, yeah, quite a good way of putting it, actually. Yes, it is. I mean, we like to think, basically, that this sandwich is the sandwich of the future. It's about simplicity and yet at the same time using top-quality ingredients.
I mean, sorry to sound a bit cynical, but I mean, this is marvellous marketing talk. But I mean, we are only talking about beer and sandwiches, aren't we?
Well, it is important because at the end of the day, they're an intrinsic part of the product, and that product is travelling between A and B.
The moment, obviously, has come to see if the proof of the sandwich, so to speak, is in the eating. Now, I want to watch you open these sandwiches because they're beautifully wrapped up with this heat-sealed thing, which I hate. Yeah. It takes forever to open. Come on.
Right, I'll do it for you. The first one's the corned beef.
Good Lord. Straight away.
We're actually moving towards a new form of packaging, you'll be pleased to know.
Sort of unzipper.
Which, yes, it's a bit like an unzipper, which will make life a lot easier for you. That is not an example of that, but this one is. And
these are ready fresh. I'm taking out it's the corned beef. But I mean, it just looks like an ordinary sandwich. Actually, is it going to taste remarkably? What's inside?
It's Sir Clement's tomato chutney, which he sourced from obscure parts of the country.
I shall just take a. It tastes a little like corned beef with lettuce on white bread.
I'm glad you've said that. That's exactly what it is.
David Prest was going to say goodbye to you, but in fact his mouth is full of corned beef, I have to tell you. The sandwiches, incidentally, are in for a BAFTA award. That's it from this edition of Going Places. Wherever you're going tonight, you will go safely, won't you? From us all, good night.